Welcome to another episode of Level Up. I'm Daniel with Katie, and we're really excited today to be joined by Matthew Myers and Jinsy Tan from the NSW Fair Trading, which is a part of the Department of Customer Service for the Australian government in New South Wales. It's a pleasure to have you. We've got a whole bunch of stuff to talk to you about that hopefully will shed some light on different practices we may or may not have here in Canada. So thanks for joining us. And I guess before we get started into our questions, if you wouldn't mind, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about what your jobs entail and what you do there for fair trading?
Yeah, no problems. Well, thank you firstly for inviting us. It is exciting for us to be speaking to yourselves over in Canada. My name is Matthew Myers. I'm a principal inspector here within New South Wales Fair Trading, and my colleague Jinsy Tan. We both work in the property team, which is under the New South Wales Fair Trading banner. We're the regulator, the New South Wales government's regulator for the real estate industry. We also regulate strata managers and strata plans and retirement villages and a few other different little sections in that. So we quite have a large portfolio at the moment. But we, in relation to the topics today, yes, we do regulate the real estate industry as a whole group. And that relates to sales and property management as well.
So hi, I'm Jinsy Tan, Senior Inspector from New South Wales Fair Trading, and thanks for having us today.
Thank you both for joining us. We really appreciate it. So I guess maybe we'll start with, the reason why we reached out originally is because we've been dealing with a lot of competition in our industry, and a lot of the trends we're seeing with listings is a lot of agents pricing properties significantly lower than what they're valued at in order to get as much attention to the property, in order to get as many buyers through. It's been a concern for us, especially in the last couple of years with COVID, bringing people through homes that aren't necessarily qualified to even purchase them. And so when we started digging into rules in other areas, we recognized that New South Wales has actually a rule on what you call underquoting. We call, I guess, underpricing, but it's the same thing. We were very intrigued by the fact that you have something that basically protects consumers and provides them with more clarity as to how much a home is truly valued at. And so can you tell us a little bit about the origins of the rule, how you kind of came up with it as something to protect consumers, and just what the rule actually is?
Yeah, so basically the underquoting laws that apply to the sale of New South Wales residential property started on 1st of January 2016. And the underquoting reforms are designed to stop real estate agents understating property prices. The practice of underquoting can cause interested buyers to waste time and money on inspecting properties, getting reports and attending auctions based on misleading price guides. So basically we're trying to have these underquoting laws to make clearer rules for agents and also more effective enforcement for the regulators, the government regulators as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so these reforms, since we introduced them in 2016, have, provided transparency across the industry itself for both real estate agents and consumers. And what we're trying to do with our legislation is to try and make sure that agents advertise a property in line with the comparable market prices within that area. So within the legislation, we ask them to do certain things, and that one of them would be in their sales agreement is that they list an estimated selling price, is what the agent believes the price or the guide of the house will sell for, the property will sell for. That's irrespective to what the vendor may or may not like the house to sell. Obviously, people who are selling homes want their houses to go at the best price. Mm-hmm. But in realistic terms, an agent who is the professional in that market would know that this house may be valued at $1 million to $1.1 million, for example. So we would ask them that they list that price on their sales agreement. And then once they do open homes and inspections and advertise the property, if the feedback from the buyer's feedback says that the property should be going at a higher price, then they're required under the law to amend their agency agreement and their estimated selling price to reflect that market trend. And also, before they do advertise the property, they've got to do comparable market sales, and they've got to look at the recent sales history within a confined space of that property. They can't cherry pick properties in other areas. They must be in a close proximity and then get that comparable market price to assist in relation to the estimated selling price.
Okay, so it's not as simple as a listing agent just saying, here's what I'm going to say it's worth. There has to be a substantial amount of supporting evidence to actually justify it.
Exactly right, yeah.
And so it's been now in existence and implemented for 5 years, or I guess now almost 6 years. Have you seen, in terms of how often people are reporting it, is this a situation where your inspection uncovers situations where things are underpriced, or is this the general public might voice their concern that this is something you should look into? And how often does that happen?
It happens quite frequently. So it's, I suppose, the more, and we advertise it on our website, in a layman's term for both buyers and the industry themselves to explain what undercrading is. So since we've done that, we get a lot of complaints from the consumers, in particular here in New South Wales, because we do auction sales, and auction sales requires a potential buyer to undergo a pest and building report or a strata report before they purchase. So, and also have a conveyancer review the contract. So even before you go to an auction and start bidding, you're outlaying several $100s, if not thousands of dollars, to get all those reports done. And then, so we get a lot of complaints from those buyers who undertake these reports and these pre-sale checks, aim to go to an auction, and by the first bid, they're already outpriced by several $100,000 because they've been guided by a price guide that an agent set, which is well below the market trend or the market price would reflect. So, so we get a lot of complaints from those types of potential purchasers who have just been immediately outbidded and are frustrated and upset that they've spent several $100s, if not a few $1,000s, and just wasted it and don't get any recourse to get that money back. So, so we and with our team, we do inspections. So we do routine inspections based on complaints. We also do, fortnightly compliance inspections where we go out and just independently target certain agencies, and we'll just go and do a random inspection, and we will look at sales files to make sure that they're not blatantly underquoting a price of a property. Yeah.
Right. And so from what I was reading, you do give agents a range of pricing. Is that right? Where it could be, is it like a percentage range typically, or yeah. Okay.
That range. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, 10%. So yeah, if they list a price, if they believe it's $1 million, then they're allowed to maximize that range, but by 10% only. They can't go outside that 10% range.
Got it. Okay.
And is that both up or down in terms of the pricing, or is it, generally people wouldn't overprice, but is there a rule about somebody pricing well beyond what something might be worth, or that's really not a practice that people go into there?
No. So if you believe that say for example, if you believe the house is worth $1 million, maybe to $1.1 million, then your lowest price that you think the sale would go for must be your lowest end of your range. Then you can go up by 10% and have your guide as that. Yeah. So you can't say, it's going to sell for $1 million at least, so I'll go 900,000 to 1 million. You can't do that. So
okay.
The lower end of your guide must be the lowest price you believe the house or the property would sell for.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. I thought it was, you could go 10% lower than what you thought. Okay. Okay.
So for example, that doesn't only apply to the auction, like for a property go for auction, also apply for private treaty as well. So let's say if a buyer offer, let's say 1 million, obviously, and the vendor declined that offer, then obviously the agent cannot quote a price less than 1 million because the market tells you that it's ready to pay for 1 million offer.
Got it. Okay. Now, in our market, and I think it's similar in Australia, we're seeing a lot of competition for homes. And as a result, a lot of times the price actually exceeds an agent's expectation in terms of what they've seen comparative market analysis. So when that happens, is that kind of an exception to the rule when you're kind of investigating and looking into those situations?
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes there may be competitive bidders, for example, who just, for whatever reason, bid more than whatever an agent may have suggested. But in relation to the undercrading guidelines, we do ask them that when they do their estimated selling price in their guides, that they have to provide or show evidence of reasonableness of that guide. So that means it must be reviewed. So we also have commissioners' guidelines for supervision guidelines, and those supervision guidelines dictate that an agent must review their estimated selling price weekly. So every week they must review their feedback from their potential buyers or the market trends and adjust that price accordingly. So, and that may mean it may go down. They might have buyers that come in and say this is not worth $1 million, it's worth $800,000, and by all means they can revise their price down. But if they're getting offers like Jinsey has said of $1 million and the vendor saying no, then their guide must go up to reflect the current trends that are presented to the agent.
And that, in effect, keeps everybody who's interested or potentially interested aware of at least enough. Like 10% is a big number, but it's not so big that I think it's prohibitive on people to understand around where they'd expect to pay for a home.
Right.
Exactly right.
Which is great. So auctions, as we said, is something we're beginning to introduce in Canada, but it's definitely not something that is, for a multitude of regulatory reasons, it's not something that's taking off here. Sure. But it is picking up, and it's one of the major ways that home sales take place in Australia. Is the underquoting somewhat of a symptom of auctions more than private treaty sales, or do you see it being an issue as much in both types of sale there? Just because auctions are a little bit more arbitrary, would that be part of why the rule was introduced in 2016 as a response to more auctions taking place?
Mm-hmm. I would say the auctions are probably the underlying reason as to why underquoting would exist. I think underquoting is used to get more people, on site on that day, more bidders, more interested people, or even a bigger crowd to hype up the bidders. So I think, in essence, underquoting is a byproduct of auctions. So I suppose the underquoting guidelines and the provisions there in the Act, make it allows transparency across either types of sales, whether it be private treaty or an auction. But definitely, I think it is an underlying issue from auctions.
So, if an agent is caught underquoting, what are the punishments or the repercussions that an agent will face?
So agents who commit an underquoting offence can be fined up to $22,000 and could lose their commission and fees earned from the sale of an underquoted property.
Okay.
Yeah. So the $22,000 is a maximum fine if they were to go to court, if you put them before a court. But generally, what we do as is an intermediate sort of an instant sort of reaction is if we find an agent who's underquoting, then we will issue them an on-the-spot penalty, an on-the-spot fine, and that's for $2,200. Yeah. So we'll issue them, and then we'll also issue and generally we'll look at the licensee in charge of the business, and we will look at them in relation to their supervision or their lack of supervision over the sale. And if we deem that they've been, if we think that they haven't supervised their agents properly, then we'll issue them an on-the-spot fine as well for lack of supervision.
Okay,
that's good. That's what it should be.
Yeah. And if that doesn't deter your behaviour and you continue to do that, well, then we will look at other sanctions. So we have a disciplinary sanction where we can put you before our disciplinary action unit and take disciplinary action. So that may result in an extra monetary fine. It may result of a suspension or disqualification of your licence to act as an agent in New South Wales. Mm-hmm. Or the ultimate one we can do is we can prosecute you and put you before a local court and have you charged, and a magistrate, as I said, can issue up to $22,000 for a personal fine.
Mm-hmm. So in giving someone a penalty or assessing one, is it generally after the transaction has taken place, or is it the moment you see something being misrepresented and before somebody's actually entered into a contract? Or does it happen both ways?
Both ways.
Okay, so it's really just when somebody brings it to your attention, you go right in there and
try. So obviously with the complaints that we get from auctions, they're post-auctions where generally, like I said, the sale price is massively different to what the guided price was. So a lot of those complaints are reactive post-sales. But our proactive approach as a team, as a regulator, is that we go out there every week or every fortnight and we do compliance actions and we target specifically sales and look at their underquoting provisions and make sure that they've adhered to that.
Okay. Got it. So when an agent is listing a property for sale, I know you said price guide, is that typically what it is? Like, because in Canada, what we do is we just list one price and that's the price that everybody sees. Is there typically an advertised price range, or is it one price?
It's up to the agent. So,
Okay.
So under the vendor's instruction, they can list it with the price guide, a specific price or a price range. Like we said, is the 10% price range, or even the vendor can instruct the agent not to disclose the price guide.
And that could change from week to week, you were saying as well, right? As the valuation might adjust. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So if
Sorry. We have some prohibitive terms as well. So in relation to the sale, when they use a price, we do have some prohibitive terms. So they can't use the word from at the beginning of a price. So you can't say from $1 million. It either has to be a price or a price guide.
Okay.
Or the symbol plus sign. So they can't use that.
Okay. And you said if a seller chooses not to disclose the price guide, is that's an option? So how would that work?
It would seem so. An agent must still include the estimate selling price in their agency agreement. But if the vendor instructs the agent not to disclose the price guide, it's up to them. Yeah.
So they could use the words like for auction or contact agent, for example, or for sale. That's all. They can use those words.
But they can't quote a price less than the estimate selling price, basically.
Okay.
So in a situation that does have quite a bit of competition, so let's say somebody's put out there a price of $1 million, that's the estimated price, but maybe it's private treaty, but 6 people are interested in the home and all want to offer at the same time. Would the rule of thumb be they basically will, if they really want it, they go roughly 10% above that price and assume that they're on the high end of value, and that's how people compete? Or do people just kind of go nuts if they really want it, irrespective of what that price is? Because it is telling people what the value is based on actual evidence. But what we see here, as we mentioned before,
we don't have evidence.
I mean, first of all, there is no evidence here. Like there might be people here listing a home at $699,000 and it's going to go for $1.5 million. Like there are situations that go nuts.
Yeah.
But even on a lesser scale, I'd say it is more normal to see a home go for greater than 10% above the list price than within that range. Right. And for that reason, when you've got multiple people competing, notwithstanding the other problems like them buying with no conditions and it being 100% firm, price alone, people just throw a number out there that they think will be higher than everybody else because they don't know any better. And I would suspect that when you're already displaying a verified value or close enough to value, people still keep their highball numbers in check based on what they know of what the value is. Or do people still get crazy sometimes when there's a lot of competition?
There still is that crazy sort of market out there. I suppose just before COVID and during COVID, sales here in the market went up quite considerably high. And in our sort of more exclusive areas along the eastern suburbs, along the water and the coast itself, like there were sales there that went for $7 million over the estimating guide. And we've checked them, and like you can't control, like I said, 2 people competing for a house. If they've got the cash, they're going to pay whatever they want for it, and that's fine. But when we go to the agent, as long as they can show us that their market appraisal or their ESP, their estimated selling price, is within the market, what the market dictates, and that's fine. And even before you sign up and do your sales agreement with your vendor, with your guide, you have to show them evidence. You have to show them the appraisals and show this is what I've looked at in the area. Homes are selling for $1.1 million. So I think you're going to get about the $1.1 million mark. They have to show the vendor that. They can't just go, well, I think it's worth, $1 million. We'll just see how we go and we'll just stick it out there. So so they have to show that they're reasonable in relation to their selling price, not only to themselves as an agent or us as a regulator if we ask, but they also have to show their vendor.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
To me, the idea of auctions as it relates to this is sort of the allowable exception to the rule, because when things are transparent, and to your point, 2 people are competing, but they're aware of what the other person is doing. So this isn't being fictitiously driven by a guess,
right?
The same way. It still might be a symptom of a misvalued opening number, but as long as there's more than one person aware of what's happening, it makes it sit a little bit easier with me from a fairness perspective.
Sure. Yeah. And even with our auctions, they're controlled. There are auction guidelines that relate to every auction. So every bidder must be registered properly and show proper identification. And generally, the auction sales, the condition of a sale is that once post the sale is done, the successful purchaser must provide a 10% deposit there on the spot. You know what I mean? So ultimately, when you go to an auction and you have a group of bidders, and there are 2 or 3 going for it more, and the rest have dropped off, you would say it's safe to say, to assume that those bidders are there for the house or the property and not there to, just increase the bid and make bidding. So yeah, definitely, if it does go up, it does go up. But generally, it's a legitimate reason as to why it's done. Yes.
Right. So how does the reserve price work with the price guidelines? Does the reserve price, are there unreserved auctions or unreserved? Yeah. Or like no reserve auctions, or is it within the price, or you might not, I don't know if you know, might be asking.
No, it's not something the agent can control. So it's the decision made by the vendor. Okay. So the vendor may want to reserve at a much higher price than what the agent's estimate price was. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So every auction there must be a reserve by the vendor.
Yes.
Having said that, they could put down $1 if they just want to sell the property. If it's like a deceased estate or something like that, they might just put $1 as a reserve. That's fine, but there must be some sort of reserve written down and signed by the vendor and conveyed to the agent prior to the auction sale.
Okay. And that.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
And if the sale goes up to a certain level and it doesn't meet the reserve, then that's when they can suspend the auction and discuss that with the vendor, and then discuss whether the property should go on the market or they pass it in and the sales campaign continues again later on. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
So you've been this has been 6 years, and it seems like people understand the rule to this point. Like, I'm sure it's taken, and maybe not, maybe that's the first question is, whether it's realtors, consumers, are there still challenges in people who don't understand the concept, or has it been in place long enough that everybody gets it and lives by it right now, generally speaking?
It's been in long enough that the industry, like the agents and that, know about it or should know about it, and their licensees and their industry bodies, they all know about it. They talk about it, and it's part of their training that they do for compulsory training. So sometimes the topic of undercoding is talked about. However, having said that, it is still quite high within our industry that agents still do it. And for whatever reason, I don't know if it's competition and that sort of stuff, that they try and drive the prices like that with undercoding. But for example, since May this year, we had a dedicated team targeting undercoding. And we've issued 102 fines, separate fines in relation to undercoding in that short amount of time. And that was during COVID, where, so the restrictions on sales and inspections was limited, but still the market was quite high, but still undercoding was quite prevalent. So we've issued about $172,000 just in fines for undercoding related offences in that short period of time. So it is still there, sadly to say, but it is. But having said that, the understanding of it is a lot higher now with the industry. So when we do speak to an agent or their licensee, they do get it straight away. So it's easy for us to educate. But we do try and educate his approach as well. But having said that, we do have a zero tolerance on undercoding, and 99% of the time you'll be issued an on-the-spot fine for it.
Got it. And do you find that undercoding happens in, I guess, when in areas that have more competition, or is it kind of doesn't really matter? It's kind of all across your state, or
it's across the state, but it happens more often in more expensive area.
Okay.
Yeah. So it does happen across the state, but in our inner city areas and towards our eastern suburbs, which is along the coastline, and our northern suburbs, which is the more affluent areas, we do find that undercoding is more prevalent there. I don't know if that's based on competition, and a lot of times the undercoding is used to try and, I suppose, bait a vendor, where they'll go to the vendor and say, look, I can get you the $2 million you want for this house, and then they try and bait the vendor into do that, and then on their side of the fence where the agent has to do paperwork. Their ESP is down here, or their ESP, you know what I mean? So sometimes it's used to try and get the sale first and, you know, promise the world to the vendor, and then they try and make up the ground later on and try and get the crowds in, or the bidders in, or the buyers in to look at the property that's well undervalued or whatever else. So, there's a myriad of different reasons why they do it, but I think competition and the price of the properties itself dictates the undercutting sort of happens in these areas more so than others.
Got it. Okay.
So you said that it's a zero tolerance approach to things when you identify underquoting, someone's getting fined. Is there any sort of appeal process, or does an agent have a way to say, well, but this is what I did and this is why I put the number in, you don't understand? And does that happen sometimes?
Sure. So with our legislation, that dictates that they must keep records, and the records must be kept for 3 years. So in relation to their ESP, or the estimated selling price, they have to keep, like I said, they have to show the vendor, and they also have to keep records to show us that their ESP is, the reasonableness of the ESP. So they have to show us why they believe that they set that price guide, and why they, didn't change it, or they kept it, or they lowered it. So every time they revise it, they have to amend the sales agreement to make sure that their revision is noted. They also have to tell their vendor. But so they have to keep the records there and basically explain to us why they've set that price, and then we can review that and that decision that they've made, and base it and look at that in relation to legislation, and we make a decision whether or not they've committed an offence. If we do issue them a fine, then
if you have the option to request for review, that goes to a different team to review all the paperwork.
Or they can court elect it and have it and let it go before the local court and have it heard before a magistrate.
Got it. In terms of the types of offences that agents are charged with, would you say underquoting is one of the more prevalent ones, or are there other ones that are more common?
I think the more common one is when the agent's not ensuring their estimate selling price remain reasonable. So often when they started, selling the property, obviously they have evidence to support their original estimate selling price. But during the campaign, they receive offers and buyers' feedback, but they fail to ensure the estimate selling price remain reasonable. So they fail to revise their estimate selling price and, quote their new price. So that's what we often found.
I've got a question that you might not be able to answer because this almost speaks to the thought process of a realtor. So I don't know. So you got to think like a realtor for a second. In our market, and I'm sure everywhere, there's a lot of vendors and sellers out there who feel their home is worth more than it is. And so when they approach us or any realtor to sell their home, we might say, listen, your house is worth 1.2 million. And they say, that's great, but I think it's worth 1.4, or I won't take anything less than 1.4. Now, in our case, and specific to us, we will typically say, okay, well, then we won't take the listing because it's kind of a waste of our time. But in a case where a realtor agrees to take on a listing like that, they would still be required to have a range that's not in line with what their client's expectation is, right? Like just because their client expects 1.4, they'd have to list at 1.2, or they'd have to have the range of 1.2. How does that work? And maybe it doesn't happen because of the fact that they've got to put that value out there, because if they ever were to sell at their client's expectation, they'd be violating the rule of their own valuation. You know what I mean? Does that happen? Or is this rule almost inherently preventing that from happening for realtors?
Well, yeah. So with the sales agreement, when they sign up a vendor, the sales agreement that we have dictates that they, like, for example, the vendor wants 1.4. So that can be written into the agreement saying that the vendor wants 1.4, and then it has the agent's estimated selling price or guide. And that's where they would put 1.1 to 1.2 or $1.2 million. And that's where they have to show evidence to the vendor saying, I know you want 1.4, we will try our best, but at the moment the market dictates that it's around this area. So they can take on a listing as long as they've ensured that they've provided that evidence to the vendor to make sure that they've met their expectations. Whilst you want to be up here, we're about here at the moment. Like, we will try our best as an agent to bring the crowds in and the buyers in to try and get you up there. But in realistic terms, you're down here. So they do have to meet those expectations.
Yeah, and like we said, if the vendor has declined an offer that's higher than the agent's estimated selling price, and they have to revise it immediately.
Yes.
And cannot quote any price less than that price that the offer they received.
Okay.
Right.
In the period of time that a property is listed in Australia, like for us, it's 5 to 7 days that a place gets listed for sale and it's sold, or we're reviewing offers. And I believe it's longer. Is that correct in Australia? Like, is it a longer listing period before, like, an auction, for example, would take place?
Generally, they would list it on the market for 4 weeks before they go on auction.
Okay.
Yeah, so they want to gather as much crowd as they can before the auction.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's different.
It's just, I mean, our wheels were spinning before we spoke to you. It's just, I don't know what the travel rules are now, but if you wouldn't mind coming to Toronto and maybe doing a couple of seminars here for the government, perhaps, that might be helpful.
We could do a road show for you, for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I just have one more question. I don't know if you have anything.
I mean, I could go on forever, but I want to respect your time as well.
Yeah. And I don't know if I mentioned it before. I'm not sure, like, once the property is sold and the buyer pays their deposit, is there a cooling off period for the buyer? And could they potentially opt out of the agreement afterwards?
So generally, before the exchange contract, the buyer has to pay 0.25% of the selling price. It's a contractual matter between the buyer and the vendor. So they may want the buyer may want to waive that cooling off period and enter into a contract. So it's up to
it's like a negotiation.
But generally there is cool off periods for every transaction.
5 days.
5 days. Okay. And then if they decide to move forward and not go through with the agreement, then they are charged that quarter percentage point as a fee kind of thing, or a cancellation fee type thing. Yeah.
The vendor keeps the 0.25%.
Yeah, they'll forfeit that. Yes.
Okay. That's what I thought. Okay.
And are conditions on the deals relatively common, or do you see a lot of deals where most of the due diligence is done in advance of someone putting an offer forward? So things like a home inspection, financing conditions, things like that, or is that often something you'll see alongside the offer that maybe protect a buyer following the contract where they can get out of the deal?
I think it depends now, because a lot of agents and that sort of ask for, in relation to finances, they ask to make sure you've got pre-approval set before you come and sort of negotiate a sale. Sometimes the conditions of sale are subjected to finances, obviously, to make sure that because with the prices that have gone up, sometimes the banks don't evaluate a property and loan the full amount. So there's issues in relation to that. So they are subject to certain conditions, and they could be also pest and building inspections. So again, it's a negotiation between the vendor and the potential purchaser. And that's where they put the 0.25% down. And if it does fall through at the end because of finance, then you do forfeit that, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Another question for you.
Keep going.
Well, I mean, one part of the reason we do this podcast and a major reason we're talking to you is because, we identify things here that are less than ideal from our perspective of protecting consumers and protecting the industry. And you've obviously, as a country, but specifically in your roles, you've identified an ability to address some of these things. Are there still, or if you, from what you see, could add more rules or things that are still not being addressed that you sit back and say, I can't believe the industry is still getting away with this? We've got a laundry list of that. I don't want to put you in a position, but I mean, a lot of the stuff, I feel like Australia is just ahead of the curve. And to be clear, we don't think there's a right way to do things. We're just big advocates for choice and the ability for consumers to be able to
make an informed decision.
Make a decision, that's open and that they have all the information. And we don't currently have that situation here to the degree we'd like. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of light years behind where you are now, and you've got choice and you've got transparency and you've got things like the underquoting rule. What's still missing in Australia right now, or what could help make things even better for protecting consumers? Or is everything made?
It's not perfect. I think one of our mandates, or one of our governments, the state governments here in New South Wales mandates, was for some time now is to reduce red tape. So whilst we do have our legislation and it can be restrictive in some instances, we're trying not to overburden the industry with regulation. So I think we've got I suppose we're trying to get a balance. I think we've probably got a good balance at the moment where there is a lot of responsibility placed on an agent with the legislation itself, but it also allows them to, I suppose, act as adults and freely, sell a property. As long, but so we also have the rules of conduct attached to our legislation. So there are schedules there, and they dictate certain rules whether you're doing as an agent, as a licensee, as a selling agent, or a property manager. So, and there are certain rules in there which we can fine you as well for. And one of them is that you must act in the best interest of your client. So, as a vendor, as long as you're out there trying to do the best you can, and like we get complaints about all the time that some buyers were left out of the buying process because they were down here at the lower end of the bargaining, so they weren't contacted again and the property sold. Well, the agent tried his best or her best to try and keep you informed, but you're down here, so they've got new clients, they're moving forward, so they're acting in the best interest of their vendor or their client. So we would deem it to be fair process. So as long as, like I said, transparency is the best thing, and as long as an agent can keep records of their actions and why they've done certain things, then we will base that on a balance of fairness and say, well, you've done the best you could, and we'll allow you to go. So I'm not sure that there's more we could do. Like I said, we have a supervision guidelines issued by the Commissioner of Fair Trading. They're quite prescriptive. Mm-hmm. We have the rules of conduct, and then we have the legislation as well. So there is a lot of I suppose control around an agent and an agency and licensee in charge of what they do. So I don't know if we could add too much more without being too over-regulated.
Right. Yeah, it's got to be a balance, I think.
True, it has to be, yes, yeah. And and a lot of the stuff is contractual too. So when you sign up with a vendor, there's that contractual side of thing, which is more of a civil matter, which we won't tie into. Yeah. We just, it's more about the agent's conduct. That's what we look at.
Right.
And generally when we do get complaints as a regulator, when we take on a complaint, we're acting as the regulator for the state, and we're taking action against an agent. We're not defending the vendor, Mr. and Mrs. Joe Blow. We're not acting for you. We're acting for the state. So your matter and we don't provide any financial redress to a vendor or a complainant. We have a tribunal which they can go to separately and do that civilly. What we do is we just look at it as a breach of the legislation, and we'll act accordingly on that. So,
right, interesting. That's good. Yeah. Well, yeah. And just one more thing with how we do things here is we have buyer's agents. So there's selling agents, buying agents. The buying agent is actually paid through the seller through the listing agreement that's been signed between the listing agent and the seller. So it's kind of further complicates things.
The buyer can pay by the vendor.
Yeah, the vendor pays a total commission that is ultimately split between their representative and the eventual cooperating agent who represents somebody else. So it's effectively an incentive for people to come and bring their clients to their home. However, the buying agent doesn't have a fiduciary duty to the seller. The buying agent has a duty to their own client. So there's all kinds of inherent conflict in where the money's coming from.
Yeah.
No, definitely no go here.
That'll be next week's episode.
It sounds like you have a lot of issues that you need to discuss.
No, I mean, to be honest, overall, our industry is really well run. It's just these things that I think, people find loopholes and different ways around things. And I think it's gotten to a point with certain aspects, definitely the underpricing, where it's just gotten out of control. Mm-hmm. And I think, a lot of people hate the government regulations and government coming in and trying to control things, but it's the only way that it's going to stop the masses from doing these types of practices. So I think it's really important for our industry just to consider this as a whole, because if you're just trying to get one-off agents to try to change their practices, they're not going to do it, because it actually doesn't end up working in their seller's best interest, because they're not seeing the same results that an agent that's underpricing is. So it's kind of like a vicious cycle that needs to be stopped.
Well, generally it's not bad actors in our industry. Like most agents are underpricing because they feel they need to, because the expectation of the consumer is, if I want a home and I've got $1 million to spend, I need to search for homes priced at 700,000.
Yeah.
Right. So if I price my home at $1 million, I won't even reach the buyers who can afford what I have because they're searching at lower prices, expecting things are all underpriced. So it doesn't make it right, but it does mean that changing one or two attitudes of one or two agents will not address the problem. It needs to be a blanket solution to really weed out bad actors.
Yeah, I agree. I think with our undercutting guidelines, I think, like I said, provides a level playing field. So if you're a buyer or you're a vendor, you know where the market is. So if you're looking at a guided price of $1 million, you know you're around about that price. You should be searching for that level. So yeah, definitely. I think it's a win-win for both sides of the fence, including real estate agents themselves as realtors. You know what I mean?
Exactly. I think that's one thing that people don't understand is there can be a solution that does benefit both sides, even though buyer and seller have conflicting objectives, one who wants to pay the least and one who wants to sell for the most. More clarity for everybody only helps things get done rather than completely muddying the waters with made up numbers that don't mean anything. So this is it's eye-opening. And
it is. It's eye-opening for us. I don't want to buy a house in Canada, but it's a complicated process.
There you go. Exactly. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think it's created a bigger responsibility on buying agents to understand what a place is worth when their clients want to see a place. And it's very frustrating to tell a buyer, no, that's going to go for 1.2. Right. And they say, well, what do you mean? It's priced at 600.
This is crazy.
So it's definitely I think a crawl, walk, run for this industry right now, but we're getting there. And it's discussions like this that really help I think, open people's eyes. So we really appreciate it.
To show people that it's actually implemented somewhere else and it actually works. And it's not just such a crazy idea. So thank you so much, both of you, for your insights today. I really, really appreciate it. And if there's anything we can ever do for you, I don't know, show you more, tell you more stories from the battlefield or something. We're happy to share.
By all means, thank you for the invitation. It's a great discussion today, I think. And by all means, if you want us back, we'd be more than happy to come back and discuss other issues.
I think that there's a world of things that you do there that we'd love to implement here. So I don't doubt we might call on you.
We'll make again. It'll be a field trip. We'll come to.
That's true. Why don't we come visit? That's even better.
Oh yeah. Sounds great.
Well, thank you so much again. We appreciate your
time.
No
worries.
Okay.
Have a good day.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.
Level up.